When we look at the pyramids, we see mystery. Monuments to gods and kings built thousands of years ago. But behind the sand and stone lies a question no one ever asks. Who paid for them? Because these weren't just tombs. They were billion-dollar projects in today's money. Hundreds of thousands of workers, years of labor, mountains of food, tools, and resources. Someone had to fund it all. So where did the money, or in Egypt's case, the bread and beer, come from? The answer reveals something extraordinary, that ancient Egypt wasn't just building monuments, it was building an economy. This is the story of how the world's first great civilization paid for the impossible. To understand who paid for the pyramids, we have to understand how Egypt itself worked. Because ancient Egypt wasn't a cash economy, it was a redistribution machine. Every harvest, farmers brought part of their grain to state storehouses. That wasn't a choice, it was tax. In return, the pharaoh promised protection, order, and the favor of the gods. The temples kept the records, scribes tracked every sack of grain, and the state decided where it all went. Money didn't flow, grain did. Bread, beer, and oil were the currency of Egypt. They paid workers, financed temples, and funded royal projects. So when the pharaoh wanted a pyramid built, he didn't need gold, he needed surplus. He simply redirected the flow. Grain from farmers became rations for builders, beer became wages, and every loaf of bread handed out on the Giza Plateau was part of a national accounting system, a massive cycle of labor, faith, and food. But this wasn't charity, it was control. By feeding tens of thousands of workers, the pharaoh fed loyalty. Each pyramid was a statement of divine power, paid for by the labor and harvests of an entire nation. The pyramids weren't just built by hands, they were built by an economic system, one that turned belief into bureaucracy and faith into finance. Forget the image of slaves in chains. The people who built the pyramids were workers, paid, organized, and fed by one of the most complex bureaucracies the ancient world had ever seen. Every day, thousands of laborers arrived at Giza: stonecutters, haulers, bakers, brewers, carpenters. They didn't earn gold or silver. They earned rations, bread, beer, and onions. A typical worker might get 3 loaves of bread and 2 jugs of beer a day. Skilled craftsmen earned more. Supervisors, double rations. It was a payroll, not in coins, but in calories. Each loaf had value. Each jug of beer, a unit of trust. And behind it all was an army of scribes. They tracked every worker, every delivery, every grain of wheat that entered or left the state silos. Clay tablets recorded shifts, absences, and bonuses. Yes, even in 2500 BC, there were bonuses. Beer wasn't just a drink. It was a medium of exchange, liquid currency. And bread wasn't just food. It was wealth that could be stored, counted, and distributed. Together, they formed the backbone of Egypt's labor economy. A system so advanced, it ran like clockwork without a single coin. Because in ancient Egypt, money wasn't metal, it was management. And the pyramids weren't just construction projects. They were proof that bureaucracy could move mountains. Chapter 3: The Pharaoh's Treasury. Behind the pyramids stood a financial system, not of coins or credit, but of control. Egypt's true wealth didn't sit in vaults or temples. It grew in the fields along the Nile. Each year, when the river flooded, it left behind rich black soil, the foundation of everything. The pharaoh's officials measured those floods with a nilometer, a carved stone column that predicted how much grain the harvest would yield. A high flood meant abundance. A low one meant famine and trouble for the state. When the harvest was good, the surplus was taxed and stored. Mountains of grain filled state silos, guarded day and night. That surplus became Egypt's treasury, and with it, the pharaoh could build anything: temples, roads, monuments, and of course, pyramids. The funding wasn't magic, it was math. The state collected the excess, redirected it into labor, and turned agriculture into architecture. Every stone at Giza was paid for in wheat. Every block of limestone represented the taxes of thousands of farmers. And for them, it wasn't just obligation, it was religion. Working for the pharaoh meant serving the gods, ensuring the Nile's favor, and buying a little piece of eternity for your family. So when we ask who paid for the pyramids, the answer is simple and enormous. It wasn't gold or slaves or foreign kings. It was Egypt itself. Millions of small contributions woven together into a monument of devotion and power. The pyramids were more than monuments. They were investments in eternity. But every investment has a cost, and the cost of immortality was staggering. For decades, Egypt's best labor, resources, and management were pulled toward a single goal: building a mountain for one man's afterlife. Entire industries formed around it: stone quarries, bakeries, breweries, transport crews, record keepers. It kept the economy alive, but also tied it to the will of a god-king. When the pharaoh died, construction stopped. Workforces scattered, storehouses emptied. The system had to reboot until the next ruler demanded another eternity of his own. And yet somehow Egypt endured. Because the pyramids didn't just drain wealth, they created it. They kept people working, resources flowing, and faith intact. To the pharaoh, the cost was justified. To the people, it was purpose. To history, it was a masterpiece of economic engineering. The pyramids weren't built to last a lifetime. They were built to outlast value itself. And 4,000 years later, they still stand. Proof that even the oldest economy on Earth understood one timeless truth: that wealth fades, but legacy compounds forever. In the end, the pyramids weren't paid for with gold. They were paid for with faith, labor, and the promise of eternity. They were monuments to power, yes, but also to the world's first understanding of economy. A system where value wasn't stored in coins, but in people, in what they built, what they believed, and what they left behind. Egypt turned devotion into productivity and faith into finance. The pyramids are what happens when an entire civilization invests in an idea: that death can be defeated by design. And in a way, they were right, because long after their empires faded, their investment still stands, profitable only in memory. If this gave you a new perspective, don't just scroll away. Hit subscribe. This is Economic Chronicles, where history exposes the present and the future is written in the lessons we refuse to learn.